Hi, I'm Femi Okay.
I'm Malika Bilal. Protests, politically motivated arrests, and a state of emergency in the Maldives. So what does it mean for the country's future?
This show really has our community buzzing on Twitter, and if you're joining us live on YouTube, you can join the conversation as well, and you too could be in the stream. A political crisis is unfolding in the Maldives, where just this week, President Abdulla Yameen declared a state of emergency.
The situation escalated in part because of a standoff between President Yameen and the Maldives Supreme Court. Last week, the court threw out a terrorism conviction against the country's former president, Mohamed Nasheed. The justices also ruled that a number of other political opponents had unfairly been convicted and ordered their release. On Tuesday, security forces stormed the Supreme Court building and arrested 2 of the 5 justices who President Yameen accused of plotting to overthrow him.
So what happens now? Joining us to talk about this in Doha, Zahina Rashid. She's an Al Jazeera journalist and former editor of Maldives Independent. In Maldives, Jeffrey Wahid. He's the Maldives Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva. Also in Mali, Eva Abdallah. She's a representative of the Maldives Democratic Party and a member of Parliament. And Layal Manik is a journalist and presenter for Channel 13, a broadcast news outlet in the Maldives. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you. Malika, where should we start?
So we are in the midst of a 15-day state of emergency, we being the Maldives, and since that's our topic today, this is what Shauna on Twitter had to say about that. The state of emergency was invoked only to strengthen the president's grip on power. He has effectively paralyzed the judiciary, sieged the parliament, and with the support of a few security officers, he has hijacked the entire state. Some really big accusations there on Twitter. Eva, from your perspective, break this down for us. Who is President Yameen, and does he stand accused? Do you agree that he's done all of these things that she says he's done?
There's no doubt about it. You can't deny the fact of the matter. On February 1st, the Supreme Court ruled. The Supreme Court ruled and ordered the release of a number of political prisoners, including former President Mohamed Nasheed. Immediate and the reinstatement of 12 MPs who had been unconstitutionally sacked by the Elections Commission. President Yameen immediately cracked down on and he defied the Supreme Court ruling and said he would not implement the Supreme Court ruling. And this is where the standoff started. President Yameen then declared a state of emergency. He had the military and the police storm the Supreme Court and drag the Chief Justice of the country. He had the Chief Justice dragged across the floor and jailed, a Chief Justice and another judge at the Supreme Court. And President Yameen refuses to comply with the Supreme Court ruling. This is where the standoff started. And the same evening, President Yameen arrested a leader of a political opposition, President Mahmoud Abdul Gayoom, who had ruled the country before President Nasheed. President Yameen has also used the state of emergency for a purge. I would call it a purge on the political opposition, a purge on the judiciary, which is refusing to comply with him, and a purge on the parliament, and a purge on the entire opposition.
So, guys, let me share with you what Jeffrey tweeted out. Jeffrey, I picked this up off your Twitter feed. Presidency of Maldives, President declares state of emergency. Look at some of the reaction here. Thank you, Mr. President. Save our nation. Thank you, Mr. President. Please stabilize the country and align the Supreme Court so that our life can go on as usual. One more here. Another thank you. We want a stable country where the Supreme Court rulings are along with the Constitution. Exclamation mark. Jeffrey, when you heard about this state of emergency, your reaction was what?
See, we have to keep in mind why exactly a state of emergency was put in place in the first place. You know, it all comes down to the Supreme Court decision that Eva did mention on the 1st of February. Let me put things into perspective for a second. If the United States Supreme Court one Friday evening ruled that all of a sudden the presidential election, the last 2016 presidential election, was nullified, no one asked them to weigh in. There was no case before them. And this is exactly what happened with our Supreme Court. The verdict came out of nowhere. It was decided on a weekend. There was no cross-examinations, no hearings. And out of a judge's chamber, all of a sudden, the Supreme Court of the Republic of the Maldives decided to absolutely usurp the authority of the judiciary into themselves, to usurp absolute authority onto themselves. Now, what that decision on the 1st of February did, it did two things. The first thing it did was it consolidated absolute power in them by invalidating the role of the Judicial Services Commission. Now, this is the commission that has the primary mandate to regulate the judiciary. And then the second thing that it did is that it took a number of dubious political positions, including, of course, releasing a number of high-profile former politicians who are accused of grave, grave crimes, ranging from arson to keeping arms to embezzlement to kidnapping to attempting to assassinate the president. You know, the level to which they've gone is absolutely ludicrous. And it's not like it's not that the state of emergency was just imposed. The Attorney General actually tried to go to the Supreme Court and talk to them.
Jeffrey,
hang on a minute.
Eva wanted to ask you a question. Eva, go ahead.
Yes, I would actually like to ask Jeffrey this. When the Supreme Court of the Maldives actually did nullify an election in 2013, when your father ran and won just 5% of the vote, when Supreme Court nullified that election, why didn't we get the same response from you? And why is President Yameen refused to comply this one ruling from the Supreme Court when for the 4 years of his presidency,
you're talking about a moment in our history when we needed dramatic leadership, when we needed people to step up and put the good of the nation first, and that's exactly what happened.
Eva and Jeffrey, I hear you both. I hear the volume. I don't hear the specific words. Hold tight for a moment. Zahina, what did you want to add? Go ahead.
I'm curious, Jeff. Why do you say that the Supreme Court ruling on February 1st nullified President Yameen's presidency? I saw nothing of the sort. It said two main things. One is reinstating the opposition members to parliament, and then freeing the political prisoners. It made no mention of President Yameen.
That what was created was a constitutional crisis which required a state of emergency. The state of emergency that the president was forced to implement is about protecting the balances of power that is enshrined in our Constitution.
Can you explain the constitutional crisis for us, please?
Yes, hold tight for a moment, because I'm hearing three of you and not one very clearly. Zahina, just make your point very clearly, and then we're going to move on.
My point is that there was absolutely, it's factually incorrect to suggest that the Supreme Court nullified the election that brought President Yameen to power. That is absolutely incorrect.
All right, Jeffrey, I hear you disagree. Zahina, I hear you're making that point. Malika.
So I want to bring in one other voice into this conversation, and that is a voice of someone you all know, a former stream guest also. This is Mohamed Nasheed. He is the former president of the Maldives, and he was the first democratically elected president. Here's what he told the stream about this crisis.
President Yameen has arrested the Supreme Court judges, 2 judges, imposed martial law, and overrun the state. We've almost lost all the democratic gains that we had in 2008. But you don't have to listen to me. You don't have to take my word for it. We have the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Prince Zayed, very clearly saying President Yameen has, to put it bluntly, he says, usurped the authority of the state rule institution and its ability to work independently from the executive.
So Layal, I'm curious about your opinion there, because even if you don't want to take it from the former president, he does quote the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, who says that the current president has usurped the authority of the state. Does that give you pause?
No. Well, first and foremost, ask him about the abduction of a former judge, former high court judge. Criminal court judge. He abducted him using the military, using the National Defense Force, but in this case, President Yameen, in this administration, they arrested the judge according to the Constitution. First, to begin with, the Maldives Police Service arrested them. Also,
can I ask which part of the Constitution that they arrested the Chief Justice according to?
Investigation for bribery.
The Constitution was suspended,
Every single. The constitution was suspended when the judges were
not
arrested.
suspended.
A state of
The
emergency was
Constitution still
declared
allows
over
freedom
the
of expression. It allows freedom of movement.
Yes.
Daily life is
Hold
not
tight for a moment. Let me
protected
just
in
check in on what Zahina has been reporting.
Of the judges
Layal, just
those immunities were
Layal, give me a moment.
suspended by the state of emergency.
Layal, give me a moment. We'll get right back to you. Zahina, has the Constitution been suspended? I know you've been reporting on this for Al Jazeera.
Several articles of the Bill of Rights have been suspended, and initially the president also suspended articles relating to the judiciary. So the one that states that the Supreme Court is the chief arbiter of all of the Constitution.
When you have the Chief Justice accused of taking millions of dollars worth of bribes, it fundamentally violates the balance of powers enshrined in the Constitution.
So here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm thinking. Eva, Jeffrey, Zahina. Here's what I'm thinking. Moving us on a little bit, how do you get out of this situation, this impasse, where some opposition members are jailed? There's a state of emergency. Layal, how do you get out of this situation? What's a good resolution?
Well, these political detainees you're talking about, to begin with, there's no such thing as political detainees in our constitution, under our penal code. But these people who were arrested, who were convicted, they are convicted, as Jeffrey mentioned earlier, under embezzlement charges, for kidnapping, for terrorism charges. These people, they are actually posing for a national threat. So the state of emergency, which was declared, was to bring the stability and the peace into the country. For example, Mr. Ahmed Adib, former vice president, he was arrested and he's convicted for possessing firearms and trying to assassinate the president. So if the Supreme Court order, if the ruling was implemented, so a person who poses for national threat will be out in free, like a person who has who tried to attempt assassination, and also a person who possesses firearms. These are people who pose for national threat, right?
Layal, I hear you. I don't
President
hear
Yameen
a resolution
really,
from you.
I think President Yameen must resign. I think President Yameen has to go.
The only way for us to move forward is to allow
I think President
rule and law to prevail, to make sure that people who are accused of crimes are investigated, to make sure that...
All right, so Jeffrey is saying that crimes have to be investigated, as that's one way out. Malika, what are you hearing?
So another thing that people are putting forward online is that perhaps there needs to be international help to get out of this crisis. This is Tape, who says India and Sri Lanka have the political clout to twist the arms of President Yameen. First, start imposing visa restrictions on political appointees of the government. There's someone else who has called for international help, and that is the former president, Mohamed Nasheed, you heard earlier. But he got a response on Twitter from Mohamed Nabi, who says, why are you calling other countries to come in? Because the people of the Maldives are happy with our president and his decisions to keep us safe. Let us decide our leader by vote. Jeffrey, what do you make of the calls for international players to help India, China, for example?
We're always happy to work with international players, but that's not what the former president called for. The former president called specifically for foreign military intervention in our country. And this is the thing, no leader of our nation, whether in the opposition or otherwise, should ever ask for a foreign military presence to come into our country, whatever the reason.
Jeffrey, that's
as a small
remarkable
state,
ignorance of our history.
Sovereign state. We could never recover.
That is remarkable ignorance of our history.
Hold tight for a moment.
Every time the country has been...
Layal, hold tight for a moment. Hold tight for a moment. I hear you trying to respond. Hold tight for a moment, just so I can hear one person at a time. Eva, go ahead.
The resolution is very clear. President Yameen must go. President Yameen must resign. We have a president who would invoke a state of emergency just because he feels insecure. This state of emergency is unconstitutional.
A state of emergency to protect the Constitution.
It's not actually
Jeffrey, please hold tight. I want to hear Eva, and then I can hear you respond. Just give me a moment.
There isn't a natural disaster in the country. The state of emergency was called for because a despotic paranoid ruler feels increasingly insecure as we approach the elections, and the opposition coalition is gaining momentum and supporters, and the opposition coalition of former rivals shows no sign of breaking. And this is why the state of emergency, because President Yameen feels paranoid and insecure.
The biggest
and
problem with
this is
the
only
biggest problem with this
left
entire
Would you let a
process
person who
got
tried
is
to
that we are
assassinate you out of
not.
the jail? Would you do that, Eva?
The problem with this
I'm sorry?
process is that truth doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the fact that what the facts are on the ground, because time and time again we see the
Jeffrey,
opposition
what
saying
would you know about
literally
facts on the
anything.
ground? When
So
was the
guess,
last
give
time
me,
you
all right,
reached
so guess,
there?
hold tight for a moment.
Eva?
I'm hearing good points because I have a little earpiece in my ear and I hear you beautifully. No one else is hearing you well. So I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste their time. Layal, I know you've got something to say. Layal's going to say it. No one else is going to talk over her. Layal, go ahead.
To begin with, I want to ask Eva if she would let anybody who tried to assassinate her out of the jail, even after being proven guilty of it. Also,
All right, you asked that question.
state of-
Let's hear the answer. Eva.
Would you do that, Eva?
If somebody, first of all, if somebody tried to assassinate me, I would like them to be tried in a free and fair process. Even if the target was me, it has to be a free and fair process and not a political persecution.
All right, guess, hold tight for a
Well,
moment.
it was a
Hold tight for a moment.
and
Layal,
also
thank
the
you.
Supreme Court,
Thank you. You asked your question. Just give me a moment because I want to bring in our online community. They really want to join in your conversation as well. We come right back to you. Hold tight.
So people are still kind of focused on how do we resolve this current situation? And there's a couple of ideas here. I'm going to throw this to you. This is one person who says, will there be an election? Because there is an election that was scheduled for later this year. Some talk of early elections, but here's what people think about that. Nobla says, all the opposition leaders have been in prison. There's sufficient disincentive for anyone seeking to stand for election against Yameen. Another person writes in on Twitter, Arsham says he isn't going to allow a fair election, so he needs to be removed by other means. He's already an example of casting your vote for temporary needs, and as far as I'm concerned, he needs to step down now. Zahina, what do you make of elections, early elections? Do you see that happening? Will it matter?
Early elections will not happen in the country. President Yameen, so at the moment, the Elections Commission, there's a lot of criticism against it because it's not seen to be independent. And this is one of the reasons why that is so, is because it stripped 12 members of opposition from the parliament. Not only that, all of the 5 members of the Elections Commission are allied to the ruling party. So I don't think there will be early elections, but the question of if an election will happen and if that will be free and fair is also in doubt.
Let me just share with you guests this comment here from Hussein Hassan. He's the Chief Justice Abdullah Saeed's lawyer. And he says here, the Chief Justice informed his lawyers that immediately after the Supreme Court ruling on February the 1st, he received a number of threats, including a call saying they would cut him to pieces unless he reversed the ruling. So, Layal, let me just bring you back in here because you made a hypothetical. What if your life was at risk? Now, if this is happening to members of the judiciary, how do you get out of that situation? How does this resolve itself?
I don't think that is happening. The Chief Justice, he took bribe money from former President Maumoon, and then now he was inside the Supreme Court and he called out for foreign intervention. Being the Chief Justice, he called out for foreign intervention. I don't think that is so.
So you don't believe they would cut him to pieces?
Also, the main issue we have to take here is how Mohamed Nasheed is calling out for foreign interventions continuously. He's calling out for Indian military to come and to come to Maldives, as they did in November 3, 1988. But the bigger picture here is in November 3, 1988, the Indians, they came not because of any domestic internal affairs, but they came because some people, some Maldivians, they brought in foreign people into the country, and they assassinated tons of Maldivians. They assassinated military people. That's why they called out for military at that time. But this is a domestic, internal affair. It's something of the something inside the Maldives is happening. It can be resolved. I think as Eva being a parliamentarian,
Layol, take a breath, Layol, so that Zahina can ask you a question.
Listen to the government and then go for a fair dialogue.
Take a pause.
The government is calling out for a dialogue, but the opposition, all these parliamentarians, all these political leaders, they are refusing for a political dialogue.
Thank you. Zahina.
Well, so on your last bit on the fact that political leaders are refusing dialogue, that's also factually incorrect because there's been many offers from, including from the UN.
We sent out invitations even today requesting that all political parties come to a dialogue.
Jeffrey, you have the entire political opposition in jail, and you have
the opposition is not in jail. People who've committed crimes are in jail. Kidnapping is a crime. Attempting to assassinate the president is a crime.
Do you
okay,
think?
So I'm actually, I hear you, Eva. I hear you about to ask a question, and I know Zahina was trying to finish up her thought, but I'm going to use that pause to jump in here because I want to bring up one other thing. We'd be remiss to have this conversation without talking about this, and this is the fear that so many people online have told us they fear, even maybe for appearing on this show, their tweets, their names, their faces. I want to talk about that fear. This is what we got from Ismail via video comment. Here's what he said.
Recently, we have been seeing how the security forces have, especially the government and security forces, have been defying the constitution and court orders. As a result of this, we've been seeing, we fear we might create a society that doesn't believe in the rule of law, and this could affect us as a community in many ways.
So he's not the only one. Maya, I want to read a tweet from Maya. She says, I'm a Maldivian studying abroad with family and friends back home. I find myself in a constant state of anxiety, frantically checking the news and Twitter for updates. I feel like the majority of people, if not everyone, are concerned, but they're scared to act due to possible consequences. Jeffrey, can you understand that fear and why?
I absolutely understand that fear because the rhetoric that's coming out of the opposition is so vile and so intense. The thing is, the reason why we have constitutionally created independent institutions of horizontal accountability is to ensure that the human rights of every Maldivian citizen is protected.
All right, so let me do this. Jeffrey, finish your sentence. And Zahina, hold tight for Jeffrey to finish his sentence. Jeffrey, finish your sentence.
We have an integrity commission to oversee the police to make sure that human rights are protected, that they are prosecuted if any security force violates that, and we also have an independent, constitutionally created institution, which is the Human Rights Commission,
and Zahina,
to do the same.
Yes, Zahina.
So, I mean, I think I have received death threats while I was working in the Maldives. I've had a colleague who has disappeared, who still, we haven't heard from him since. I've had a friend who was killed.
And I know him well too.
And none of these cases were investigated. I know a majority of journalists in the Maldives have received death threats, and we filed them all, and none of those cases were investigated. There hasn't been a single case
spoken to chief police investigators. They absolutely have been investigated.
It hasn't gone to prosecution, Jeffrey. Why is that?
Are you actually speaking to Zahina and I, both of us who've had so many death threats? My own son received death threats. Zahina had to leave the country because of threats.
Eva, do you doubt that I've received those death threats as well? Do you for a second doubt that?
All right, so this is interesting. Everybody pause for 1 second. Everybody pause for a second because I can't hear all of you. I just hear noise. Pause for a second. Come back to me. All right, great. Is there anybody who hasn't received a death threat? Everybody on our panel has? Layol, have you had a death threat?
The problem is that the...
Yes? Everybody,
the polarization in our community is toxic.
This is my thought here. Eva, what is it like in a state of emergency in Maldives right now, down on the ground? We're having this political conversation, but for real life, how are people managing?
People are very apprehensive. People, as you said, there's a sense of fear all around. People are very afraid if they speak out, they lose their livelihoods, they lose their jobs, they go to jail, they face police beatings. If they come out on the streets, they have to face undue force, they have to face pepper spray, tear gas. So there's a lot of apprehension on the ground.
Constitutional crisis. daily life is not affected. Businesses are open, no outside island outside of Mali.
Listen to those.
If you walk down the streets of Mali,
Listen to those
you wouldn't even
combating
realize that
opinions
there was a
there.
state of emergency in place.
This gives you really a good snippet of what it is like in Maldivian politics right now. You hear that back and forth. Our conversation will continue online. Use the hashtag AJStream. Thank you, guests. Thanks for watching. See you online.